Have you ever watched a movie so intense, so haunting, that it crawled into your mind and stayed there for days? Now imagine someone watching that same film, but instead of moving on, they get stuck. It becomes more than just a story on screen. It turns into an obsession, a blueprint, a mission. This isn't just a movie review or a trivia breakdown. This is a real story, a real crime. A chilling journey into the mind of a man so consumed by a fictional character that he believed he could bring that fantasy to life and get away with it. And tonight, you're going to find out how he almost did. You didn't click on this video by accident. Something about that title grabbed you. The idea that someone out there blurred the lines between fiction and reality, on purpose, is both terrifying and fascinating, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're diving into. So let's make a deal. You stay with me till the end, and I promise, every question that's racing through your head right now will be answered. Who was he? What movie inspired him? What happened to the victim? Did the police catch him? How close did he get to pulling it off? The truth is more twisted than any script Hollywood could have dreamed up. And the way detectives solved this case? That's the masterstroke. But first, I want you to sit with a thought, because this is how it begins. There's something deeply unsettling about people who live double lives. On the outside, they look like us. Work jobs. Smile politely. Scroll through their phones at coffee shops. But behind closed doors, inside their heads, a very different version of them exists. One that's darker, hidden, maybe even waiting for the right moment to break free. That's what made this case so disturbing. The killer in this story didn't snap overnight. No, he planned. He rehearsed. He studied. Like an actor preparing for a role. Like a director blocking scenes. Every detail was lifted straight from a cult classic crime film, a movie that gained a quiet, obsessive following for its graphic storytelling. A movie some people love for the thrill. But this man? He saw something more. He saw it as a guidebook. You're probably wondering, how does someone become so warped by entertainment that they decide to kill for it? That's what hooked me too. And that's why I had to tell the story in full. Because it's not just about what he did, it's about why. What pushes a person from passive viewer to active monster? What's going on in someone's brain that lets them think they can mimic murder without facing real-life consequences? That's the psychological crack we're going to pry open tonight. And as we do, I want you to think about how you consume true crime, horror, thrillers. Because this case will force you to look at those genres in a very different light. Let me paint the picture for you. Small town.
Midwest.
Safe.
Quiet.
The kind of place where everyone waves to each other at the grocery store. Where people leave their doors unlocked. It was one of those tucked-away towns you'd never expect to be the setting of a real-life horror film. But that's the thing, this killer didn't want a big city stage. He wanted authenticity. He wanted to make it feel real. Because to him, it was real. He thought he could blend in, follow the film's script beat by beat, and leave behind a mystery so complex that no one would connect the dots. Except they did. And you're about to see how. The victim? Let's just say she was everything he was not. Outgoing, vibrant, loved by her community. She had dreams, ambitions, a life worth living. And that made her perfect in his eyes, not as a partner, but as a character. He didn't see her as a human being. He saw her as a scene that needed to be filmed, a piece of a story that only made sense to him. That's where the horror starts. Because the moment someone becomes convinced that their victim is just a prop in a bigger story, they've crossed a line most of us can't even comprehend. I'm talking to you directly now, not just as a storyteller, but as someone who needs you to stay with me. Because we've barely scratched the surface. And the deeper this goes, the more it's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about crime, obsession, and the terrifying impact of media on the wrong mind. This story is not a dramatization. Every step, every clue, every police interview, every chilling piece of evidence, it all really happened. And before the end, you'll feel like you were right there with the detectives, unraveling the truth one breadcrumb at a time. As we follow this investigation, you're going to meet some key players. A rookie cop with a gut feeling. A seasoned detective who's seen just about everything, but nothing like this. A profiler who begins to realize the killer may be one of the most dangerous types. the kind who thinks he's smarter than everyone else in the room. And, of course, the killer himself. Not a raging lunatic, not a raving maniac, but calm, calculated, soft-spoken. The kind of man who smiles when he talks about his favorite movies and casually drops the line, "Some stories are worth killing for." Let that sit with you. This is more than a crime. It's a dissection of obsession. A case that challenges how we think about motive, fantasy, and the very thin veil separating our online lives from our real ones. And somewhere in this story is a moment, a tiny, overlooked moment, that changed everything. That turned the case on its head. That one little mistake he made. That one clue he left behind because he was so sure the police wouldn't catch it. But they did. And that's the twist that's going to leave you speechless. So here we are. You, me, and a story that needs to be told in full. And trust me, it only gets darker from here. Just when you think you understand what happened, something new will flip it on its side. You won't want to look away. And when we get to the final reveal, I promise you, it'll haunt you, just like it haunted the officers who worked the case. Just like it haunted the families involved. Just like it haunts me. But before we get to that, you need to hear about the night everything went wrong. The night the script came to life. The night the killer pressed play on a scene that wasn't supposed to exist outside a theater. And the moment the victim realized, this wasn't a movie. This was real. It started long before the murder. That's what investigators would later realize. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of violence. It was the result of years of subtle transformation, of a man slowly rewriting the way he saw the world, replacing reality with fiction, truth with fantasy. His name was Eric Lancaster, and on the surface he was the kind of guy no one paid much attention to. Early 30s, clean-cut, soft-spoken, worked at an independent movie rental store that somehow still clung to life in a digital world. To most people in town, Eric was forgettable. A little awkward, maybe. A bit too into movies. But harmless. And that's the first twist. He wanted to be invisible. He worked hard at blending in. But in his mind, he wasn't just some guy restocking DVDs. He was the director of his own secret film, and every person around him was part of the cast, whether they knew it or not. The deeper you look into Eric's past, the more chilling it becomes. There were signs, but they were easy to miss, because they weren't loud or violent or dramatic. They were small, insidious, like how he always watched the same cult horror film over and over, not for entertainment but to take notes. There was Lauren, a co-worker who'd only recently started working at the store. Bright, kind, quick-witted. She treated Eric like a friend, even joked with him about his obsession with film. But what she didn't realize, what none of us would have realized, is that Eric saw those moments differently. Every smile, every shared laugh, every mundane interaction was filtered through the lens of his fantasy. She wasn't Lauren the co-worker to him. She was Lauren the character. The one who dies in the second act to push the plot forward. The one who makes the audience feel something before the story turns dark. He never said it out loud, but his journal said it all. The audience won't expect it. She's too perfect. That's what makes it work. What made it even more disturbing is that Eric didn't live in total isolation. He had a neighbor, a guy named Mike, the type who talks to everyone, always grilling on weekends, always up for beers and banter. Mike thought Eric was strange, sure, but harmless in that introverted, movie buff kind of way. They talked about films sometimes. And in hindsight, Mike remembered how Eric once said something weird during one of their movie nights. They'd been watching a gritty crime thriller, one of those films where the killer narrates his crimes as if he's the hero. Mike laughed and said, "Man, this guy's nuts." But Eric didn't laugh. He just said, "Sometimes the killer makes more sense than the cops." At the time, it felt like a throwaway line. But later, when detectives dug into Eric's apartment, they found hundreds of DVDs, all arranged by genre and tone, with handwritten notes tucked inside each case. Some were underlined, some circled, and some had questions scribbled in the margins like, would this work in real life? As the investigation deepened, the police had to ask the hardest question, was Lauren his only target? Or just the beginning? Because as chilling as it was to think about one murder inspired by a movie, the possibility of multiple murders, each following a different script, was even worse. And just when they thought they understood what they were dealing with, new names started to surface. There was Jenna, an old flame who had ghosted Eric 2 years earlier after a few awkward dates. There was also a woman named Claire, who worked at the public library and once asked Eric to lower his voice while watching trailers on a library computer. Seemed innocent enough. But she was mentioned, obliquely, in his journal. The librarian thinks she's in charge. That won't last. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was enough to shake the cops. Red herrings started piling up too, complicating things in every direction. One was Lauren's ex-boyfriend, Tyler. A hothead with a record. Minor stuff, but enough to raise eyebrows. He'd been seen arguing with her in the parking lot just days before she disappeared. Another was a mysterious online forum where people discussed reenacting film scenes in real life, something called Method Shadows. It wasn't illegal, not technically, but it was filled with people using screen names and sharing twisted ideas, like how to simulate crimes without getting caught. One user, DirectorX42, had posted a detailed thread about staging the perfect scene where no one suspects a murder. When police traced the IP, it led to a public library. But not just any library. Claire's library. The tension around town grew thick. Rumors flew. People whispered at cafes, speculated at barbershops, posted wild theories online. Was it a serial killer? A cult of movie freaks? A jealous ex-boyfriend pushed too far? Nothing was clear. And Eric? He remained strangely calm, polite, helpful even. He cooperated with police, answered questions, provided alibis. But every time they talked to him, the detectives said they felt something was off. Like he was acting. Like he wasn't responding emotionally, but performing a role he'd practiced. And in hindsight, that's exactly what he was doing. Meanwhile, the victim's body still hadn't been found, which made everything worse. Without a body, it wasn't officially murder. It was a missing persons case. And Eric knew that. He knew the rules. Knew how long it would take before real action could be taken. That gave him time. Time to reset, to write the next scene, to maybe even cast his next victim. And while detectives tried to stay ahead of him, they couldn't shake the feeling that he was always one step ahead. That he was watching them. That they were part of the story, too. And then came the night that changed everything. A security camera, one single, outdated, grainy security camera from the back of a gas station, picked up something so small, so ordinary, it almost went unnoticed. But a rookie officer spotted it. A movement. A shadow. A person dragging something. And suddenly, the entire case cracked open. But what they found next wasn't what they expected. It wasn't just evidence. It was a message. Written for them. From him. And it was signed like a director signing off a film. Just when detectives thought they were beginning to understand the scope of Eric's twisted vision, everything started to unravel. The footage from the gas station had given them a lead, a direction, even hope. For the first time in weeks, they felt like they were closing in. But that confidence shattered when they returned to the evidence room the next morning and found the original hard drive missing. At first, everyone assumed it had simply been misplaced, an internal clerical error, maybe a tech transfer that hadn't been logged correctly. But by noon, it was clear. Someone had deliberately removed it. The backup files had been corrupted, and the security logs were wiped clean. That footage, the only real proof tying Eric to the scene, was gone. The department was thrown into chaos, fingers pointed, protocols questioned. It was as if someone on the inside didn't want the truth to come out. Someone who understood how vital that single piece of evidence really was. And then, the phone call came. It wasn't official. It didn't go through dispatch or any recorded line. One of the lead detectives, Maria Jensen, received it on her personal cell late at night. A distorted voice warned her not to go any further. "You're playing a role that wasn't written for you," the voice said. "Step off the stage, or you'll end up like her." It was vague, but the message was clear. Someone was watching. Someone who believed this whole thing was more than just a crime. It was a performance. A carefully scripted show with real lives hanging in the balance.
And Jensen?
She was interfering with the script. The call came from a burner number, and tracing it led nowhere. But it confirmed what she already feared. Eric wasn't acting alone. Or, at the very least, someone else was deeply invested in keeping his secret protected. As the investigation stalled, detectives turned inward, re-examining everything they thought they knew. That's when another layer peeled back: Eric's childhood. An old therapist's file surfaced, detailing his time in a state-run adolescent program after a series of disturbing incidents at school. He'd once staged a mock crime scene in a classroom as part of a creative project that left a substitute teacher hospitalized with a panic attack. Another time, he orchestrated a fake kidnapping involving classmates, convincing one girl she was in real danger just to see how she'd react. He was sent to a behavioral rehab program for a year. No charges were ever filed, and those records were sealed. But someone inside the system had flagged him even back then as exhibiting an unhealthy detachment from reality, with deep fixation on film violence and control. Somehow, despite that early warning, Eric had slipped through every crack. But that wasn't the biggest shock. While combing through Eric's current connections, detectives found a name they didn't expect: Detective Marcus Hale. A seasoned officer who'd been on the force for over a decade and had briefly mentored Eric in a community outreach program 6 years prior. It was supposed to be a temporary volunteer mentorship, pairing troubled adults with professionals for career inspiration. Hale never mentioned it. In fact, he claimed not to remember Eric at all. But emails pulled from Eric's deleted accounts suggested otherwise. Dozens of messages. Some philosophical, some cryptic. One stood out. "I see the way they look at you. But you understand the truth. You know the mask they wear. When the moment comes, I'll need your silence." It was enough to raise doubts, serious doubts. Was Hale just another pawn in Eric's game? Or was he protecting him? Was it blackmail? Manipulation? Or something worse, an alliance? Jensen confronted Hale quietly, off the record. His reaction was strange. Not angry, not scared, just blank. "You don't know what you're in the middle of," he said. "This isn't about him." It never was. It's about the message. When she pressed him, he said nothing more. The next morning, Hale called in sick. By afternoon, he'd cleared out his desk. Vanished. No one had seen him since. The story had taken another dark turn. A piece of key evidence vanished. A detective disappeared. The case file was growing murkier by the hour. And just when it seemed the investigation had hit rock bottom, something else arrived: a package, addressed directly to Detective Jensen, no return address, no postage. Inside, there was a single VHS tape, hand-labeled in red ink, Final Cut. The team scrambled to find a player, dusting off an old machine from the evidence locker. The tape began with static, followed by a flickering image. A woman. Bound. Crying. It looked like Lauren, but the quality was grainy, and her face was obscured. A muffled voice said, "This is your ending, unless you stop. Credits roll soon." Then the screen went black. But there was one more thing, barely visible at the end of the tape in a single frame. A street sign. One detectives had seen before. A place no one expected would come back into play. And suddenly, it wasn't just about Eric anymore. Someone else was scripting the next act. And they'd just turned the page. The next twist in the investigation didn't come from inside the department. It came from hundreds of miles away, in a quiet town where Eric's estranged sister, Melanie Prescott, had been living under the radar for years. She hadn't spoken to Eric in nearly a decade, not since a heated falling out over a family inheritance that tore what little remained of their relationship apart. She wanted no part in his life, not even when he resurfaced online in strange forums talking about cinema, morality, and what he called narrative justice. But just 2 days after Detective Jensen received the mysterious VHS tape, Melanie woke up to something chilling: a manila envelope tucked between her storm door and the screen. It was unmarked, with no postage, just like the one Jensen had received. Inside was a photo of her as a child, standing in front of an old drive-in theater that had been torn down years ago. But it wasn't just any photo. It was one she'd never seen before, and worse, she wasn't alone in it. Standing behind her in the shadows was a figure that looked eerily like Eric. Scribbled across the bottom in the same red ink was a single phrase: "Final scenes are never forgotten." Melanie hadn't been following the case. She hadn't even known Eric was missing. But that photo sent her into a spiral of paranoia. She called the local sheriff's office and told them everything she knew about Eric's obsession with violent films, about his teenage breakdown, about the time he admitted to her that he didn't believe people were real unless they were being watched. "We're all just extras until someone points a camera at us," he'd said once, almost laughing. But now that phrase took on a terrifying meaning. The sheriff contacted Jensen immediately, and within hours Melanie was put under protective surveillance, though she insisted she wouldn't hide. "He wants us scared," she told Jensen over the phone. "But this feels bigger than him. Like someone else is continuing the script." At the same time, forensic techs finally managed to recover a partial frame from the final seconds of the VHS tape sent to Jensen. The street sign they spotted was connected to an abandoned film studio outside Atlanta, Georgia, a place Eric had mentioned in several of his old blog posts as being the birthplace of his true self. When the police arrived at the studio, they found it completely empty. But in the main soundstage, someone had meticulously recreated the living room from Lauren's apartment. The exact layout, the same throw pillows, even the broken lamp that investigators had found during the initial crime scene sweep. It was like stepping into a mirror. And in the middle of the room sat an old reel-to-reel film projector, still running, casting flickering light across the wall. The footage it played was grainy, silent, and deeply disturbing. Clips of actors reenacting moments from the investigation, using lines that the detectives themselves had said during interrogations, including words that had never been made public. Someone had been watching them closely. Someone was filming their investigation as if it was part of the story, like it had always been part of the story. The discovery sent a ripple of fear through the team. How deep did this go? Was Eric truly the mastermind behind everything, or had he become a puppet in a much more elaborate production? That's when an even more disturbing realization hit Jensen. She remembered a man who had shown up at the precinct weeks earlier posing as an independent filmmaker. He claimed to be shooting a documentary on criminal psychology and asked for access to case files, ride-alongs, even casual interviews. His ID checked out at the time. His name was Jack Harlow, supposedly a student at a well-known film school. But when they tried to track him down now, every record linked to him had vanished. School ID, fake. Driver's license, untraceable. Background, non-existent. And the most terrifying part? Jensen found a note in her desk drawer that hadn't been there before. It read, "Director never reveals his face. But you've already met him." Suddenly, the story shifted. Was Jack Harlow a pseudonym? Was he orchestrating this as a new phase of Eric's delusion, or had he been pulling the strings all along? Melanie remembered him too. She told Jensen that a man fitting Jack's description had approached her years ago, asking about Eric's childhood and offering to pay for old home videos. She declined, thinking he was some kind of fan. But now it looked more like pre-production. This entire case, the clues, the taunts, the performances, wasn't just about reenacting a movie. It was about making one. A real, unfolding horror that blended fiction and reality so tightly no one could tell where one ended and the other began. And just when it couldn't get worse, another package arrived, this time to the police department's public relations office. But how? How could he be involved in all of this? His voice continued, every word like a blade slowly cutting away at the fabric of the life she thought she knew. "I've been watching you. All of you. You've been so blinded by your own search for answers, you never even questioned who was feeding you information." The light flickered back on, casting a harsh glow over the room. And there, standing in the doorway, was Jack. But he wasn't alone. The woman beside him was familiar, too. Jensen's eyes widened as she recognized the face, the very same face of someone she had once trusted completely. Melanie. But it wasn't the Melanie she had known, the one who had been there every step of the way. This was a different version, hardened, cold, and with an unsettling smirk curling at the corners of her lips. "You never saw it coming, did you, Sam?" Melanie's voice was dripping with a sickening kind of satisfaction. "We've been working together all along. You were never supposed to figure it out. The whole investigation? It was just a game to us." Jensen's mind reeled. She staggered back, her hand pressed against the wall as if to steady herself. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. Her world had tilted on its axis, and everything she thought she knew was suddenly a lie. Jack, the guy who had claimed to have the inside scoop on Eric Prescott? He was in on it all. And Melanie? The woman she'd trusted more than anyone else? She wasn't the victim she'd appeared to be. "Don't look so shocked," Jack said, his voice like ice. "You really thought you were the one investigating us?" "No, Sam. We've been investigating you. Every step you've taken, every move you've made. We've been watching. And now, it's time for the final act." Jensen's mind spun, trying to piece together the fragments of the past few weeks. Had it all been staged? Had Melanie known from the beginning? The tapes, the threats, the clues that led her to this point, it had all been carefully orchestrated by Jack and Melanie. But why? What was their endgame? And more importantly, what did they want from her? Jack's smile widened, and for the first time, Jensen saw something far darker in his eyes, something that sent a shiver down her spine. "You see, you were never meant to solve this case. The case was never about Eric Prescott. It was about you, about how easily we could manipulate you. And now you've just become another piece of the puzzle." Jensen took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. Everything she had worked for, every lead she had chased, every sleepless night, it had all been a part of their plan. She wasn't just a detective anymore. She was a target. As her mind raced for a way out, she couldn't help but wonder, had she been the one who was being watched all along? Had she unknowingly walked into a trap, trusting the wrong people, making the wrong moves? And now, with nowhere left to turn, she had no choice but to confront the people who had set the entire thing in motion. But she wasn't ready for the most chilling revelation of all. "Don't bother trying to escape," Melanie whispered, stepping closer. "You're exactly where you're meant to be. The show's almost over, Sam, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it." As the room seemed to close in around her, Jensen realized with a sinking feeling that the real mystery wasn't just about who was behind the crime. It was about who she had become in the process. And now, in this moment of truth, the final question remained. Was there anyone left she could trust? The air in the room felt thick, oppressive, like a weight pressing down on Jensen's chest. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Jack and Melanie stood before her, the truth of their betrayal sinking in deeper with every passing second. Their smiles, twisted and self-satisfied, were the last things she wanted to see. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, and it was clear this was no longer just a case. It was her life now. The choice before her was impossible, and yet she had no time to deliberate. There was no space for hesitation. Jack's words were like poison in her ear, each syllable dripping with malice as he leaned in closer. "You think you can walk away from this, Sam? You really think you have control? The truth is, you never did. This game was never yours to win." His voice was soft, almost comforting, but it was laced with a darkness that made her skin crawl. "You're the one who's been played all along." Jensen's pulse quickened as the weight of his words settled over her, constricting her like a vice. This wasn't just about the case anymore. It wasn't about Prescott or the people who had been killed. It was about her, everything she thought she knew, everyone she trusted. In a single moment, it had all been shattered. And yet, even with the walls closing in, she wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't. But what if the truth wasn't enough? What if, in chasing the answers, she had already lost everything? Jack's eyes narrowed as he watched her struggle, a look of cruel amusement in his gaze. He could see her unraveling, the tension mounting with every breath she took. "You have a choice, Jensen. I'm offering you a way out. Walk away, drop the investigation, and we'll let you go. No more games. No more bloodshed." His words hung in the air like a lifeline, but Jensen could sense the trap. This wasn't a gift, it was a cage. And he was offering her the key. But there was no escape. Not really. In the pit of her stomach, Jensen knew that giving in to Jack's demands meant accepting defeat. It meant abandoning the one thing that had kept her going through the darkest moments of this twisted case, the pursuit of truth. If she chose safety, she would be sealing her fate. And what about those who had been hurt? What about the people who had died? Would they ever get justice if she walked away? Her thoughts spiraled as her mind raced through every possibility, every scenario. But then, just as she was beginning to form a plan, her phone buzzed. The sound was sharp, intrusive, and she reached for it instinctively, even though she knew what it meant. She unlocked the screen, and the message that flashed before her eyes made her blood run cold. I know where you are, and I know you're going to make the wrong choice. The text was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. Someone knew exactly what was going on, and they were watching her. The timing of the message was enough to rattle her, the way it pierced the tension in the room like a knife. Someone else was involved, someone who was playing a much bigger role in this than she had realized. Jack's voice cut through the stillness. What's the matter, Sam? You seem a little shaken. Let me help you make up your mind. You know you can trust me. But if you don't, well, he let the sentence trail off, allowing the weight of the threat to hang between them. Her hands were trembling, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, refusing to let him see the fear that was beginning to creep into her bones. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Melanie stepped forward, her smirk wide and knowing. It's simple, Sam. We get what we want, and you go back to your life. You get to walk away from all this. You never have to deal with the mess you've gotten yourself into. No more blood. No more bodies. Just a clean slate. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing was. Jensen's mind was a whirlwind, thoughts colliding and twisting as she tried to force herself to think clearly, to focus. Who was watching her now? And why had they sent it at this precise moment? The weight of the unknown pressed against her, and in that instant, Jensen understood something that made her blood run even colder. The people who had been manipulating her weren't the only threat. There were more, people who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the tension reached a breaking point, her phone buzzed again, this time with a picture. The truth was, she couldn't trust either of them, not anymore. She couldn't take the offer because it meant losing herself, losing her integrity. But if she refused, what would it cost her? Would she lose everything, her career, her safety, even her life? And then there was the text, the message that seemed to promise something even darker. She didn't have to open it to know what it was. She could already hear the voice in her head, the voice of her partner, Luke, the one person she had trusted more than anyone. His face was cold, drained of emotion, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was standing in front of a door she knew all too well, the door to her apartment. She felt the weight of the decision hanging over her like a guillotine, and for a moment, the room seemed to spin. Was Luke involved? Was he playing both sides? Had everything been a lie? Sam. Jack's voice sliced through the haze of confusion. You have one chance. You choose the truth or your life. But choose wisely. Because this is the only chance you'll get. The clock was ticking. And no matter what she chose, it seemed like she was already too deep to turn back. The question wasn't just what would happen if she chose the truth. It was what would happen if she didn't. With the weight of betrayal in her gut, Jensen realized something else. She didn't just have to confront the monsters she could see. It was the ones hiding in plain sight that were the real danger, he rasped. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they didn't sound convincing, because deep down, a part of him already understood. A horrible part of him had begun to accept that nothing about this, nothing about his life, was real. Not the career, not the cases, not even the person standing in front of him. Erica smiled sadly, a knowing, almost pitying expression. No, Daniel. The lies are the only thing that's real anymore. Her words hit him like a freight train, and in that instant, the walls of his apartment seemed to close in. The files, the photos, the endless dead ends, the feeling of being watched, it all made sense now. This wasn't just some conspiracy of random criminals or some deranged mind playing games. This was systematic, planned, a deliberate construction of his own life to keep him tethered to a false narrative. And now that the truth was starting to seep through the cracks, they were pulling him back in. But Erica wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper as she leaned in, eyes narrowing. And now you're going to make a choice. You can keep running, try to pick up the pieces of this broken life you've been given, or you can wake up fully. But if you do, she trailed off, letting the weight of her words hang between them, suffocating the air. Rhodes barely managed to keep his composure as his mind swirled with the horrific possibilities. If he chose to wake up, if he embraced the truth, there was no going back. There would be no career, no family, no identity left. He would be left with nothing but the raw, naked truth of what had happened, of the person he had been, and the things he had done. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, torn between the desperate hope for a normal life and the cold, heart-shattering reality of what he might have been, a lab rat in someone else's twisted experiment. His thoughts flashed to Laura, tied up and terrified in that concrete room. He had to save her. She was the last shred of humanity he had left. But if he continued on this path, if he embraced what was in front of him, it would be over. For all of them. Erica's voice broke through his thoughts again. You think you can just keep going, don't you? You think you can keep pretending to be someone else. But every move you make, every person you try to trust, every case you chase down, it's all a part of the game. You can't run forever, Daniel. You know that. For the first time, Rhodes saw it clearly. She wasn't just talking about his case. She was talking about his entire life. The house of cards he'd built for himself was crumbling, and the truth was the wrecking ball. I'm not the same person I was before, Rhodes managed to say, his voice shaking. It was a declaration, not a question. He was no longer the detective on the hunt for a missing girl. He was the missing piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle he wasn't sure he even wanted to solve. Erica chuckled softly, like she had been waiting for him to reach that conclusion all along. Of course you're not. But that's the beauty of it, Daniel. You've always been exactly who they needed you to be. And now it's time to decide. Will you remain the puppet, or will you finally pull the strings yourself? The weight of her words pressed on him, suffocating his ability to think clearly. For the first time in a long time, he realized there was no path forward that didn't come with bloodshed, loss, or irreparable damage. And yet, he knew that the stakes had never been higher. The truth was waiting, locked behind an impenetrable wall, and the key might be buried deep within him. But as he glanced at Erica, he understood.
She wasn't his ally.
She was a reminder of how far he had fallen into their world, a world built on lies, manipulation, and control. Rhodes took a step back, struggling to steady his breath. He felt like the ground was slipping out from under him, like everything he knew had been turned upside down and inside out. But then a thought gripped him, sharp and terrifying. What if the truth was a lie all along? What if there was no escape? Before he could speak, Erica turned her back, heading toward the door. Think carefully, Daniel, she called over her shoulder. You're running out of time. So is she. As she left, Rhodes stood frozen in the silence of his apartment, his heart racing as the door clicked shut. His mind screamed for answers, but every answer seemed to lead him further down a rabbit hole he wasn't sure he wanted to enter. He had no idea what was real anymore, or who he could trust. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had to find Laura, and that meant going back to the very place he feared most, Camp Novice. The place where his past had been erased. The place where the truth had been buried. But this time, Rhodes wasn't sure he could survive the truth. Rhodes stood motionless in the dimly lit apartment, the weight of Erica's words still pressing down on him, suffocating any trace of clarity he had left. The thought of his sister, Laura, tied to that chair in the cold, sterile room twisted inside him. But it wasn't just her anymore. It was everything, his life, his career, his very identity. And the realization hit him like a freight train. The conspiracy wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about Camp Novice or the dark secrets buried in his past. It was far bigger, Far more dangerous. A shadowy network that had been orchestrating everything from the very beginning. He was a piece on a board, but who was moving the pieces? He had trusted the system, trusted his colleagues, even trusted Erica until now. Every case, a false thread designed to keep him on a leash, chasing after ghosts. He thought he had been hunting the truth, but the truth had been hunting him all along. His phone buzzed again. A live stream. This time, but that trust had been shattered, replaced by a gnawing sense of betrayal. Every lead had been a trap. The image wasn't grainy or distorted. It was clear, too clear. His heart stopped when he saw the familiar figure standing in front of a room full of people, their faces hidden in shadow, all listening to the same voice. Marcus. The man who had been lurking in the background of every mystery, every clue. But this time he wasn't speaking to Rhodes.
He was speaking to them.
We've been patient. Marcus's voice echoed through the device. The program is nearing completion. We've planted the seeds of doubt, the whispers of fear. It's working. Rhodes has taken the bait, but now the final test begins. Will he break, or will he see the truth? Rhodes's blood ran cold. He wasn't the only one being watched. He wasn't the only one being manipulated. There were others. And those others weren't just victims. They were players in this twisted game. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The conspiracy wasn't just about him, or even Laura. It had spread across the very core of everything he had ever trusted. His colleagues, his mentors, even the people he thought he had helped. They were all part of it. This wasn't some rogue faction or isolated incident. This was a well-oiled machine, one that had been running for years. And it was just getting started. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Who could he trust now? Who was playing him, and who was playing their part as a pawn just like him? A gut-wrenching thought began to take root in his mind. Someone he had worked with, someone he had believed in, was part of this. Someone close. Someone who had been feeding him lies all along. But who? Before he could process the enormity of the situation, a loud bang echoed through the apartment, followed by the unmistakable sound of his door crashing open. His instincts kicked in before his mind could catch up. Gun in hand, he rushed toward the door, ready to face whoever was coming. But as he stepped into the hallway, everything went dark. The power had gone out. And then the voice. So close, it felt like it was breathing down his neck. Looking for answers, Rhodes? You won't find them. Not here. Not anymore. The voice was all too familiar. Detective Garrett? Rhodes gasped, his pulse hammering in his chest. Garrett had been his partner, his trusted ally, the man who had shared every lead, every theory, every lead-up to every investigation. They had been through it all together. Except now, it felt like Garrett was standing in front of him as a stranger. The silence that followed was deafening. The tension in the air thickened, the weight of betrayal hanging between them like a storm cloud. Rhodes could feel the grip of fear tightening around his throat. I thought you were different, Rhodes whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and raw fury. Garrett stepped forward, his face barely visible in the darkness, but the smirk on his lips was unmistakable. You thought I was different, Rhodes. That's your problem. You've always been so damn sure of yourself. So sure that the truth was just a step away. But the truth was never on your side. It was on mine. Rhodes's blood ran cold as the pieces finally clicked together. Garrett hadn't just been a colleague. He'd been a plant from the beginning. A part of the program, a piece of the machinery that had been orchestrating Rhodes's every move, every misstep. It was all a setup, a test, a manipulation of everything he thought he knew. Garrett wasn't here to help. He was here to finish the job. To bury Rhodes. To bury the truth. Why? Rhodes rasped, the words slipping out like a plea. Garrett's laugh echoed, cruel and hollow. Why not? You think you're the only one with a story? A mission? You think you're the only one who's been through hell and back. You're just another piece in the game, Rhodes. A test subject. And I'm the one who gets to end it. Before Rhodes could react, Garrett lunged, knocking the gun from his hand. The two men struggled, the fight fueled by years of resentment, betrayal, and twisted loyalty. Every blow felt like a nail in the coffin of everything Rhodes had once believed. But then, just as quickly as it began, the struggle stopped. Garrett was gone. And standing in the doorway was Erica. She wasn't alone. Behind her, a figure stepped forward, masked and menacing. The mask. The symbol. Marcus. The truth crashed down like a tidal wave, drowning Rhodes in a sea of impossible revelations. Erica wasn't just another player. She was the player. The one pulling the strings. The one who had orchestrated everything. From the very beginning. His career. His life.
Laura.
It was all part of the plan. You see, Daniel, Erica said, her voice softer now, almost pitying. You were never supposed to find out. You were never supposed to remember. But you did. And now, it's time to finish what we started. Rhodes took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had trusted them. All of them. And now, as the truth shattered his reality, he realized just how deep the conspiracy ran. How many people had been involved. How many lives had been sacrificed. And now, with Marcus's cold eyes locked onto his, Rhodes understood. This was bigger than him. Bigger than Laura. This was a war. And he had just stepped onto the battlefield. Rhodes's body was screaming for him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He stood frozen in the doorway, Erica's voice still echoing in his ears as Marcus's shadow loomed behind her, tall and sinister, like a harbinger of everything he had feared. Every fiber of his being wanted to fight back, but he couldn't bring himself to raise his fists, not now. Not when the truth, the one he had been chasing for so long, was finally within reach. The pieces of the puzzle, the fragments of the story that had haunted him, were finally clicking together, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. Erica stepped forward, her eyes cold and unwavering. The woman who had once been a partner, a confidant, was now a stranger. A part of him wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to ask how she could do this, how she could betray him so completely. But the truth burned too brightly to ignore, and as much as it terrified him, Rhodes couldn't stop it from coming to the surface. "Why?" he rasped, his voice cracking under the weight of everything he had learned. "Why, Erica? Why all of this?" She didn't flinch. "You don't get it, do you? This was never about you, Daniel. This was about control.
Power.
The kind of power that only comes when you can manipulate the truth itself." Rhodes's pulse hammered in his ears. He wasn't just part of some twisted. He wasn't a pawn in some grand scheme. He had been the key all along. His life, his investigations, the case after case that had seemed so unrelated, were all part of a much darker, much more dangerous game. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this game wasn't just a job for them, it was a lifestyle. The conspiracy didn't just end with him. It had roots in places he couldn't even begin to understand. "I was right," he muttered, his hands trembling. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. Every case that experiment. Every person I thought I was helping. You used them all." Erica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You were always too focused on the small picture, Rhodes. You never saw the big one. But it's over now. We've won. And you're not going to stop us." But just as Rhodes thought he couldn't take any more, just as the walls seemed to close in around him, the door slammed open behind him, and Garrett stepped into the room. But this wasn't the same Garrett he had known. This wasn't the same man who had once been his partner. The look in his eyes was empty, cold, as though the man he had trusted had died long ago, replaced by something else. "Garrett," Rhodes gasped, his heart seizing. "What the hell are you doing?" Garrett didn't answer, his gaze locked onto Marcus, who nodded silently. In that moment, Rhodes realized what had been right in front of him all along. Garrett wasn't just a victim in all of this. He wasn't a pawn. He was one of them, a part of the same twisted game that had ensnared Rhodes. He had been playing both sides, feeding information, pushing him toward the edge, keeping him just close enough to the truth to lure him in, but far enough from it to keep him in the dark. Garrett had always known, always been in on it. But Rhodes's mind wasn't focused on Garrett now. It was on the device in Erica's hands, the device that seemed to be the key to everything. She had a file open on the screen, one that had been hidden encrypted, but now it was there.
Exposed.
All the names, all the faces, all the people involved in the conspiracy. The program, the experiments, the manipulation, it was all laid bare for him to see. And at the very top of the list, his own name. "No," Rhodes whispered, the blood draining from his face. I wasn't supposed to." Surprised. Marcus's voice sliced through the air, calm and measured, as though he were explaining something simple, something trivial. "Your whole life has been an illusion, Rhodes. Every decision you made was part of the plan. Your every move was orchestrated, every moment guided. Your job, your friends, your cases, all of it. It was never real. It was always about pushing you, testing you, making sure you were ready for this moment." The cold reality of it hit him hard. Everything he had ever known had been manipulated. Every friend, every colleague, every ally. Even his own instincts had been twisted, warped, and pushed in a direction that had led him straight into their trap. But then something shifted. A voice, a sound, whispered in his ear. It wasn't Erica. It wasn't Marcus. It was the voice of his sister, Laura. Her words, faint but undeniable, cutting through the noise of everything else. "You can stop them, Daniel. You have to. There's still a way." Rhodes's heart skipped. The voice of Laura had always been with him, guiding him when things got darkest, and now her words seemed to be the key he had been missing. His eyes darted to the screen.
The file.
The program. The truth. It was all there, just a few clicks away. But it wasn't just the truth he needed. It was the proof. The hard evidence that could bring everything crashing down, the kind of evidence that would dismantle everything they had built. Erica and Marcus watched him carefully, waiting for him to make his move. But Rhodes wasn't ready to give up just yet. He couldn't. Not when everything was finally coming to a head. He lunged for the keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys in a blur of desperation. The file began to download, but before he could get far, Garrett stepped forward, his hand moving to pull the plug. But then, just as the room seemed to freeze in time, the final twist hit like a sledgehammer. The device in Erica's hands began to flash red. Alarms blared. A countdown started on the screen, seconds ticking down to the inevitable. "You don't know what you've done, Rhodes," Erica hissed, stepping forward in a frenzy. "You've just triggered the failsafe. This wasn't about you. This was never about you." The countdown raced. Rhodes didn't have time to think. There was no choice left, no time to hesitate. With one final, desperate move, he slammed his fist onto the device, and the world went black. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, just the feeling of everything collapsing in on him. And then, the silence was shattered. The screen flashed once more, and the file, the evidence, the proof was gone. All of it just vanished into thin air. The game was over. But the truth? The truth had won. Days had passed since the device had gone silent, and Rhodes found himself standing at the edge of the city, gazing out over the horizon as the sun dipped low, casting an orange glow across the streets that had once seemed so familiar to him. The weight of it all was finally starting to lift. The cases, the betrayals, the lies, and the endless questions that had kept him awake at night. It was over. Or at least, that's what he wanted to believe. In the aftermath, nothing felt like it used to. The world had shifted, and Rhodes had been caught in its chaotic wake, struggling to find his footing as everything around him fell apart. Yet, there was an odd sense of peace now, as though he had climbed to the top of a mountain only to realize that the view he had fought so hard for wasn't as grand as he had imagined. The truth, as elusive as it had been, was now scattered across the remnants of everything he once trusted. Erica's betrayal, Marcus's twisted ambitions, Garrett's silent complicity, each piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and yet it left a hollow void inside him. What was the point of it all? What did it mean, if the truth only led to more darkness, more corruption? The people who had shaped his life, The faces that had been there, the allies who had turned out to be enemies, it was hard to know who or what was real anymore. What he had once thought was justice had morphed into something almost unrecognizable. As Rhodes stood there, a subtle realization began to form in the back of his mind. Maybe it wasn't about finding the perfect ending. Maybe peace wasn't something you found at the conclusion of a battle, but in the acceptance that some things were beyond your control. The conspiracy had been vast, its roots entrenched deep within the systems he had spent his career trying to navigate. But in the end, it wasn't about exposing every last secret. It was about making it through, staying alive, and holding on to the fragments of the truth that could still help heal the wounds left behind. But even as this thought settled into his bones, the gnawing sense of unfinished business lingered. The truth he had uncovered. It wasn't the final chapter, was it? No, the finality of it all felt like an illusion. Something was missing. Rhodes had stopped the machine, pulled the plug, exposed the darkness. But who would clean up the mess? Who would take the pieces of the broken conspiracy and rebuild what had been shattered? And then, there was the lingering question. Was the conspiracy truly over, or had he only stumbled into one part of a much larger game? He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting. And just when he thought he could breathe again, when he thought he had finally outrun the shadows, he heard it. A message, a simple one, a name flashing on his phone screen. Laura. His sister, the one who had guided him when he was lost, the one whose voice had steered him through the darkest of moments. But now, the message was different.
Cryptic.
Unsettling. I was never part of the plan, Daniel. But they're coming for you. The words burned into his mind like a brand. They had never left him, had they? The conspiracy, the manipulation, the webs of deceit, it had all been one long trail that Rhodes couldn't seem to outrun. Even as he thought he had pulled free, the tendrils of whatever force had controlled him for so long reached out once again. He wasn't done. And maybe, just maybe, this was a fight that would never end. The phone slipped from his hand, the screen shattering on the pavement below. A sudden gust of wind stirred the empty streets, and in that moment, Rhodes knew this wasn't over. It had never been about the truth, after all. It had always been about survival, and the people like him, those who had seen too much, known too much, were never truly allowed to rest. He took a long breath, the taste of salt and dust on his tongue. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was still watching, still pulling strings, and Rhodes was caught in the middle. The sound of distant sirens pierced the night air, echoing down the empty streets. A reminder that the world never stops turning, that the game never truly ends. But for now, there was peace. For now, he would walk away. And as the wind howled around him, carrying with it the remnants of the past, Rhodes took his first real step toward whatever came next. Because in the end, the only thing that mattered was that the story was still his to write. And no one could take that away from him.